London's most mysterious murder exactly 40 years ago, one morning. The death of the famous banker Roberto Calvi, who was found hanged on one of the bridges in the heart of London, was initially considered a suicide, but as a result of the efforts of the Calvi family, it became clear that the truth was completely different. The role played by one person in particular in elucidating these facts deserved appreciation. This news is the story of that person. When Angela Gallop opened the newspaper one morning in June 1982, she encountered striking news. This was news of death. A body was found hanged from Blackfriars Bridge in central London. The identity of the deceased was at least as interesting as the manner of death. This person was none other than Roberto Calvi, known as God's Vault. Calvi gained this title thanks to the close relations between the bankrupt Banco Ambrosiano, of which he was president, and the Vatican Bank. Naturally, speculations began to emerge one after another that the Italian mafia or Eve, the Catholic Church, might be behind his murder. Gallop was a young forensic science expert at the time. This news he read in the newspaper caught his attention. However, in those days, the day will come when the question that will shed light on Calvi's death is murder or suicide. He will be the one to answer the question. Gallop probably wouldn't have believed it himself, but died moreover. Exactly 40 years after Calvi's lifeless body was found under that bridge, Gallop decided to share with the world how he put the pieces together. Gallop, whose book How to Solve a Crime recently hit the shelves in England, explained all the intricacies of the investigation to the Telegraph newspaper. In fact, Gallop has played important roles in many major cases since then. Although he took part in many investigations, from the murder of Stephen Lawrence to the death of Diana Prince of Wales, Gallop always considered Calvi's death a turning point in his career and said, "That was the first time I realized the power of forensic science to provide answers, even in the most complex cases." Now, if you wish, let's go back to the beginning and follow the evidence step by step with Gallop. Scandals were not letting you go. Early in the morning of June 18th, a passerby saw Calvi's lifeless body hanging from Blackfriars Bridge with an orange rope, and immediately notified the police. Banco Ambrosiano, of which Calvi was president, went bankrupt a few days ago with debts worth £800 million. The previous year, Calvi was found guilty in court for allegedly carrying out illegal money transfers, but was released pending appeal.
Gallop became involved in the process in mid-1992. 10 years after Calvi's death, Gallop was contacted by officials from the London branch of Kroll, a New York-based corporate research firm. The company, commissioned by Calvi's widow Clara and her 2 children, was particularly interested in working
with Gallop. Gallop would examine the evidence and then share his findings with Roberto Calvi's son, Carlo. Could a faithful Catholic have committed suicide? What was asked of Gallop was, did Calvi really commit suicide, or was he the victim of a murder disguised as suicide? Was to find an answer to the question. At the first investigation in London, it was decided that Calvi killed himself. However, this result did not satisfy the family because Robert Calvi was a very devout Catholic. Therefore, it was out of the question for him to consider suicide, which is considered one of the greatest sins in a Catholic sect. For this reason, they put intense pressure on a second investigation and got what they wanted. The second investigation ended with that Calvi's cause of death could not be clearly determined. Gallop initially did not know much about the Calvi family. The son of a banker, Calvi grew up in Milan and spent 35 years of his life at Banco Ambrosiano, Italy's second largest bank. Calvi's last position, as he rose through the ranks, was chairman of the board of directors. Realizing that his financial empire was beginning to collapse, Calvi sent his wife and daughter to live with his son Carlo, who was doing a master's degree in Washington at the time. Evidence collected from the scene was limited, Gallop's primary concern is how will I find the answer this family wants. The question was coming. Since the police immediately determined the cause of death as suicide, no comprehensive evidence collection was carried out at the point where the body was found. Gallop had very limited evidence to work with: the jacket, trousers, and shoes Calvi was wearing, the rope around his neck, and the pieces of concrete and brick from his pockets. Gallop's first job was to visit the scene, of course. Such visits were quite normal in such investigations, but since the visit was 10 years late, it was doubtful Gallop would find anything. Of course, nothing new was found. Water was always flowing under the bridge with a depth of 4.045 centimeters. It has been years since the construction scaffolding where Calvi's body was hung was dismantled and taken away. All the marks on the stones of the bridge had either worn away or merged with other marks and become invisible. However, the visit still had impressive results for Gallop. After nightfall, Gallop had a chance to better visualize the circumstances of the night Calvi died. At the point where the Fleet River flows into the Thames River, the waters were rising and falling, and the waves were growing larger due to the influence of passing boats. The construction company protected the pier off course. It couldn't be said that Gallop was completely unlucky, because the construction company kept the scaffolding removed from the bridge and preserved it in its current state, instead of dismantling it and throwing it away or using it for other purposes. In order to uncover the mystery surrounding this death, Gallop needed to determine whether Calvi could climb to the pier without anyone's help. For this reason, he had the scaffolding built in the garden of his own house. Then Gallop's husband, Russell Stock, who is also a forensic science expert, stepped in. Stockdale, who had approximately the same physical characteristics as Calvi, except that he was slightly taller, tried to climb onto the pier wearing the clothes belonging to the deceased. Default texture. Russell was easy to work with because he knew how much of our work was what ifs. Or is this possible? The only way to test certain possibilities is to do a simulation, said Angela Gallop. It seemed impossible for him to move alone. As a result of this reenactment, it was understood that it was not possible for a 62-year-old, 175 centimeters tall, not very fit and healthy man to reach the point of the scaffolding where Calvi's body was hanging, without anyone's help, especially not with the bricks in his pockets and the crotch of his trousers. When Gallop added to all this that Calvi suffered from vertigo and had a weakness in the index finger of his right hand, the possibility of suicide became quite slim. According to Gallop, neither suicide route seemed very plausible. If Calvi chose the first route, he must have done so low tide. He was supposed to have picked up the pieces of cement and brick, gone down the stairs on the bridge, walked along the river bank, walked over the piles of waste concrete, and gone under the bridge. Walking on such a path must have left traces on the leathery sole, leather shoes on Calvi's feet. However, according to Gallop's examination, there were no such marks on the shoes. In that case, Calvi must have climbed up to the point where he was suspended from the rope, the other end of which was tied around his neck. There were nitrogen monoxide marks on his shoes and clothes. This scenario required Calvi to walk along the footpath under Blackfriars Bridge, climb an almost vertical metal ladder, and jump the 82 centimeter wide gap between the ladder and the scaffolding. He must have done this with the extra burden and discomfort created by the bricks and concrete pieces he had stuffed in his pockets. And it didn't stop there. He had to move from one end to the other, holding on to the pier. However, no traces were found on his shoes that could confirm this scenario. There were no traces of the yellow-green paint still on the irons, nor was there any rust on their soles. The half-brick he was carrying did not cause any damage to the fabric of his trousers. However, in the reenactment held in the garden of Gallop's house, There were traces of bricks on the trousers worn by his wife. The absurdities were endless. If Calvi had hanged himself, why did he bother walking from one end of the pier to the other? Moreover, from a distance it was not even visible that there was a pier under the bridge. How would Calvi know where the pier was? When all this came together, Gallop made his decision. The suicide route in the first scenario was completely impossible. The second scenario was unthinkable. The possibility of murder was getting stronger. Gallop then turned his attention to two murder routes. The first point Gallop pondered was the possibility that Calvi might have been unconscious or even dead when he was brought to the bridge. To be honest, it is still unknown whether Calvi was alive before he was hanged on the bridge. According to the report of the pathologist who examined the body, no traces of wounds were found on Calvi's body, indicating that he had been beaten recently. There were no needle marks on his skin, indicating that Calvi might have been injected with a substance that would restrict his movements. The toxicologist who examined the samples taken from Calvi's dead body did not find any evidence that the deceased had been given any anesthetic by inhalation, but did not completely deny this possibility. The people who used the murder routes could have brought Calvi to the bridge, unconscious or dead. In these scenarios, the perpetrators would bring Calvi near the bridge in a car, then lower him to the pier with a ladder via the towpath, or hang him from the river wall. Another possibility was that Calvi was brought to the bridge by a boat. This last option also explained the stains found on the waistband of his shirt, his underwear, and the cuffs of his trousers. Could it have been brought by boat? According to Gallop, Calvi could have been thrown from the bridge at an hour when the waters of the river began to recede. At that time it was quite easy to bring a boat to the side of the pier where the body was hanging. Moreover, in another simulation they carried out with their colleagues, they stuck the bow of the small boat they used between the pier and the river wall, and found that the boat could stay there for minutes without any difficulty, thanks to the strength of the current. Well, wouldn't such an operation attract the attention of those passing by the bridge or the river bank? According to Gallop, the combination of the location of the pier and the darkness made this possibility very slim. Of course, things were changing in the daylight. As a matter of fact, a postal worker who was going to work at around 7:30 the next morning noticed the body immediately. To test his boat theory, Gallop needed to know the exact time Calvi went ashore and whether it corresponded to the prevailing tide times that night. The watches on his wear and in his pocket said important things. In the initial investigation, the pathologist claimed that Calvin died between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. The expensive watch on the wrist of Calvi's corpse was damaged due to water damage and was stuck at 1.52. The chain-link pocket watch, probably in the breast pocket of his jacket, stopped at 5.49 o'clock because it was not wound. The chart prepared by a hydrographic engineer showed that the river waters were high during the minutes when the wristwatch stopped, but were beginning to fall, even taking into account the wavy waters in the area. It was obvious that Calvi's body was not completely submerged in the water. The water stains on his suit and the fact that his pocket watch was intact also supported this view. In the first post-mortem examination, it was not possible to determine the time of death from body temperature due to environmental factors. Instead, the decision was made by looking at rigor mortis, that is, rigor mortis, which is not reliable at all. Another question that needed to be answered was about the height of the water after Calvi was suspended from the pier. The current had to be at a level that would drag Calvi's body away and cause him to die. However, if the water level was too high, Calvi's body would float on the water and death might not occur. Combining all these factors and consulting another expert, Gallop decided that Calvi's time on the scaffolding was between 1:50 and 2:30. This finding was consistent with the second murder route scenario. IP was disappointed as Gallop began examining the evidence. He believed that the rope removed from Calvi's neck would play an important role in solving the case. He expected to find traces of contact that would indicate someone other than Calvi. Calvi was handling the rope, or bits of fabric caught in the fibers in and around the knot. At that time, DNA technology was just developing, so even if DNA traces were found, they might not be useful, but contact traces were worth looking for. But Gallop was greatly disappointed in this respect, since the police who came to the scene were very sure that Calvi had killed himself. They preferred to cut the rope from above and untie the knot, instead of hiding it. This caused any evidence inside the knot to be lost or contaminated. Where is Calvi's mustache? Another confusing point was Calvi's mustache. The body of the deceased banker, who was known as a mustachioed man throughout his life, was clean-shaven. Examining the razor blades collected from Calvi's flat in Chelsea cloisters, Gallop could not find any evidence that they were used for mustache shaving. Could Calvi have been shaved somewhere else or by someone else? Could this have a symbolic meaning? Could the Masonic Lodge Calvi was be involved in this lodge, known as Propaganda 2, or simply Pete 2, was sometimes called I Frati Neri in Italian, meaning black priests. Could it be just a coincidence that the name of the bridge where Calvi was hanged was Blackfriars? The theory was extremely intriguing, but Gallop could not find any evidence that would allow him to answer the question. In the conclusion of the report in which he compiled his findings, it was stated that the most likely cause of death of Roberto Calvi is murder. Normally, he should have submitted this report to the police or the court, but since he was commissioned by a private company, the person to whom Gallop presented his report was Carlo Calvi. He was an expert witness in the case, where 5 people were trialed in Italy. Gallop's work ended after he made his presentation to Carlo Calvi. It laid the groundwork for Roberto Calvi's death to be deemed a murder and for the family to demand a thorough investigation. In the following years, informed about the progress of the case came to Gallop from time to time. Then, in 2005, Gallop took the stand as an expert witness in a trial of 5 people tried for Calvi's death in Italy. Among the suspects were Calvi's former bodyguard and various people with ties to the Italian mafia. This case was a very different experience for Gallop, who was used to going to court frequently due to his job. The court was held in a dark and damp hall of Rebibbia prison in Rome to ensure the safety of the defendants, so Gallop couldn't help but worry about who would be in the courtroom. Could the suspect's partners in shadowy criminal organizations also come to listen to Gallop? Although the evidence Gallop found pointed to murder, it did not implicate a specific person. All the expert sitting on the witness stand did was rule out the possibility of suicide. Gallop, who felt a little relieved thanks to this detail, said, "Still, I was relieved when I got on the plane home. 40 years have passed, but it's still not clear what happened to Calvi." The case was concluded in 2007, and the suspects were acquitted due to lack of evidence. Since then, the case has still not been solved. I am sometimes asked whether this creates dissatisfaction in me. My answer is no, Gallop said and added, "I am satisfied that I did my best and was able to use science to provide an answer to the family. However, this case somehow haunts me because it allows me to understand how forensic science, when used correctly and creatively in circumstances that at first glance seem to offer little promise, can determine how a person can survive. I saw that you were able to answer the question of his death."